Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Tuesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 25th of April, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can do that in a lot of different ways. The easiest is probably giving us a call on the Alaska Weather Information Line, 1-800-472-0391. Find us online at weather.gov/Alaska. And once you click on the map or any of the other links, you'll be taken to your nearest weather forecast office, whether that's Fairbanks, Anchorage, or Juneau, serving your more immediate community there. And once you get that, go ahead and bookmark some of the links that you need, and you can come back to them a little bit faster. On each one of those places, you'll find links to the TV maps you'll see here tonight. As always, if you have a question about what you're finding or what you can't find and you'd like a little bit of help, please feel free to email us. A simple one-line message there, even from your mobile device, is really easy to manage, and we'd love to help you find what you're looking for on our websites, nws.ar.tvweather@noaa.gov. We'll go to the entire team, and if you just scrub this part out right here and use my full name like my mother would call it, david.snyder@noaa.gov, you can reach me as well directly. Here's a look at what's going on. This is a really bright map. I'm going to try and tone this down for you just a little bit more tomorrow. But our friends at the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center are talking about breakup. And if you're in Nikolai, you've probably already heard that the ice has gone out around Nikolai. So we'll be watching the upper Kuskokwim. Remember that the ice goes out from top to bottom. And already seeing some changes in some of the rivers around South Central and also just north of the Alaska Range as you look at the Tanana River there, the upper Tanana Valley, and also around Nenana. So changes are happening there, and more changes will be seen, and you can use this map of something that looks just like it if you go to APRFC or weather.gov/APRFC for Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center, and you can zoom in on this map, click each one of these cities, and find out the community status, no warning, flood advisory, watch, or warning, and check the areas of concern that matter to you and your village and your friends up and downstream. So go ahead and check this out tonight or tomorrow. There it is up, and the river forecast folks are working hard on keeping your community safe, as well as the partnership with the state of Alaska for River Watch. So it won't be too much longer before River Watch is going. Here's a look at the visible satellite picture. As you well know, if you've been watching the show as long as I've been here, I love showing the visible satellite picture, and we finally have enough daylight from about late morning to late afternoon in time for the show to show you the visible satellite picture. And that shows us that we have a swirl of low pressure here south and west of Haida Gwaii, broad southeasterly fetch moving across Kodiak Island, south central the Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound, and embedded in that moisture, of course, is rainfall that we've seen today. Some of that has tried to make its way over Cook Inlet. Not so much of it has because of the winds blowing over the mountains, drying the situation out. In another area in southwest around Dillingham all the way up toward Bethel and perhaps up toward Sleep Mute and Lime Village, we've had some showers today, some of those a little bit heavier and darker than others there. You probably noticed those darker clouds. And then moving even further west, we have another circulation of low pressure. This one is directly under the upper level low pressure system. Watch the loop one more time and you can see that big spiral or cartwheel out there. Up north, a lot of clouds, and just outside of the scan of the radar picture is fog and low clouds, and freezing fog and even flurries there. Not a whole lot of precipitation in southeast. So let's go ahead and use the infrared satellite picture now and focus on the north slope. If you're around Barrow, Prudhoe Bay, Dead Horse, Nuiqsut, all the way out across the Beaufort Seacoast, you've had kind of a gloomy day today, and hopefully not one that's prevented you from flying around, but wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. You can see how the cloud cover here just hasn't moved at all. This is that low cold cloud cover that's kept many areas in the single digits across the north slope, where just on the other side of the hill, the Brooks Range, the weather's been considerably different. So again, that cold air across the Arctic is still powerful enough to keep your conditions at bay for now. Now watch the loop one more time and you can see how that strong south flow is trying to work its way northward. So changes perhaps in the next day or so. We'll see. The most likely initial change would be some overrunning moving across the Brooks Range there and trying to eat away at that colder cloud from south to north. Now, that is usually not a very effective method when that happens. So right now, high pressure up across the Chukchi Sea at 1,022 millibars is forcing that north and easterly flow up across the north slope. And fog and flurries will be the rule. Some of that freezing fog for sure. Out across the Gulf, winds around well, fairly light really across the central and eastern Gulf. You can see generally clear sky this afternoon across most of southeast. Low pressures down around 994 to 95 millibars. Pockets of rain from Prince William Sound to the Kenai Peninsula all the way down to Kachemak Bay. Just outside of Bristol Bay and moving north and west, we saw some showers and rain developing here again from Sleet Mute and Lime Village southward out toward the coast, and some rain around the Alaska Peninsula. Westward, maybe a spot shower or two, nothing showing up on the radar because there isn't one. But out across the west, we did have rain reported out in Shemya with fog north of Nunivak Island. Going into tonight, low pressure will spread some rainfall from south to north and into southeast. Look for widely scattered pockets of rainfall there with a low pressure system down to 990 millibars. We'll continue to see rain across the eastern side of the Kenai Peninsula and Prince William Sound, across Shelikof Strait and Kodiak Island, all the way from Lake Iliamna south and west to the Capes, and across the central and eastern chain. With cold enough air around the Pribilofs and westward, you might see rain mixing with snow there, and snow showers are more likely around St. Lawrence Island, the Seward Peninsula, and along a stationary boundary separating the coldest air up north from what most of the rest of the state and southeast is experiencing on that warm and milder flow coming up out of the Pacific. High pressure will linger across the north slope, and that's going to keep fog in place as we head into tomorrow morning. Watch out for some areas of flurries, but most likely freezing fog will be a bigger issue for you. So high pressure is just north of Barrow. The frontal boundary here lingering close to the Yukon Valley and south of the Brooks Range summits will keep that coldest air from moving southward once again, and eventually it's going to fall apart, but that's after the colder air is such a larger threat for most of us. Across the south and west, watch for periods of showers there with low pressure just east of Ammonok in some of our YK villages there. Across the central chain, 994 millibar low with showers surrounding that all the way into the Bristol Bay region and the eastern chain. So gloomy weather continues there, and there will be some fog around the Pribilofs eastward toward the Bristol Bay region. Showers continue for southeast, a 994 millibar low sitting across the eastern Gulf for you, and another wave just south and east of Tok at 998 millibars. There's really not a whole lot to write home about, but it's all just some very light circulations wrapped up in the overall flow, again, that is sitting atop of the low across the central chain. As we get into Thursday, you'll notice that hasn't moved very much either, but it is filling in and the pressure levels are coming up. We'll see some showers continuing for southeast. Some of that could be a steadier rainfall, though generally light in most areas, maybe a little bit heavier as you move into the northern Gulf. Once again, the Cook Inlet region doesn't seem to have a huge chance for rainfall there. Most of that will be around the mountains, the Kenai Peninsula, and Prince William Sound. There will be some slightly colder air dropping southward into the Alaska Range, and because of that, we're still keeping some areas of snow across the higher terrain. You'll notice that frontal boundary is gone, and that has allowed that colder air to drop a little bit further southward. But the coldest of the cold will have filtered out and mixed out by that point, but there's still fog up across the north slope with periods of rain and snow outside of Norton Sound, St. Lawrence Island, St. Matthew, and down toward Nunivak Island for your Thursday. Here's a look at temperatures today. All in all, when you get sunshine in southeast, it turns out to be a pretty nice day. 40s and 50s there around the capital city up the Lynn Canal, 48 around Sitka, 50s and 60s around Ketchikan up toward Hyder, 61 degrees, 48 in Yakutat. Mid to upper 40s around Prince William Sound, the Cook Inlet region in the upper 40s to about 50 degrees today, including Anchorage. Talkeetna was 52. Around Matsu, around Wasilla and Palmer specifically, temperatures there were in the upper 40s and low 50s. 53 around Golcana. Upper 50s for Tok out toward Chicken. 55 around Fairbanks, 51 for Healy, 56 in Fort Greely, 51 in Eagle today, 33 around Fort Yukon. Looking northward toward Arctic Village, 21, 10 for Anaktuvuk Pass, and single digits and low teens for most of the North Slope again under gloomy conditions. 20s and 30s for Kotzebue Sound. We saw 34 in Shishmaref, 39 in Nome. Wales reported 28, 1 degree warmer in St. Lawrence Island today. Around McGrath, it was 44, 45 around Unalakleet. Down toward Bethel, 48 degrees. Bristol Bay temperatures in the mid to upper 40s. The Alaska Peninsula saw temperatures in the 30s and 40s. Sandpoint was 41. St. Paul, 37 degrees, 41 in St. George, 43 for Unalaska and Dutch Harbor. And we saw 30s and 40s out across the central and western chain. Overnight low temperatures will stay mild again across south central, the interior, and southwest. 20s and 30s. Some areas around the Kenai Peninsula could hold on to temps around 40 degrees tonight. 30s and 40s for southeast, the Chain and the Alaska Peninsula in the upper 30s. St. Paul looking at 33. St. Lawrence Island 28. Barrow down to -2. Prudhoe Bay and Nidhorst still holding on to the cold there. 2 in AKwx Pass. Nome looking at 32, and Fairbanks in the mid-30s. High temperatures there tomorrow could stretch up toward 50 degrees. Some parts of the Matanuska-Susitna valleys probably pushing the 60-degree mark. Mid-50s to about 60 degrees will be possible for a few areas. Colder as you head down the inlet, though, back in the lower 50s. 50 for Kodiak southeast, mid to upper 50s for you. The Arctic coast, anywhere from 5 above to about 12 above as you head down toward Wainwright and Point Lay. Nome, expect a high of 43, 47 in Unalakleet. McGrath closer to 46 degrees, Bethel 51, Bristol Bay nearing 50, and 41 in St. Paul, with Unalaska and Dutch Harbor looking at 45 degrees. Flying weather tomorrow will include IFR across the North Slope. No surprise with the weather pattern there, right? Low clouds, ice fog, and freezing fog certainly possible. For southeast, watch for IFR conditions to develop in the south and move northward throughout the day, though just a little bit. You may not see that surge northward very quickly, but it will be in the area for Ketchikan, Craig, Klawock, and Annette, so keep your eye on that. NVFR conditions possible for Prince William Sound and likely all the way across Kodiak Island, from Nunivak Island into Norton Sound, St. Lawrence Island, and into the Bering Strait as well. Here's a look at the pass conditions, though. Most conditions for most of our main passes look to be okay. VFR there for Adigan and AKwx Pass. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass should see improvements from the morning into the afternoon. Rainy Pass and Windy Pass both expected to be VFR. Isabel Pass looking at VFR conditions, and the same goes for Mentasta Pass and Tanita Pass. As you look at Portage Pass, don't be surprised for MVFR in the morning. We'll see if it gets any worse, but right now that seems to be limited to generally the eastern side. And Chilkoot and White Pass, we expect to see VFR conditions there. Wow, what's going on with the freezing levels? What a mess. It looks like spaghetti's all over the map. We have 2,000 to 4,000 foot levels across eastern parts of the upper Tanana Valley and into southeast, and then levels come crashing down fairly quickly once you cross over the Alaska range. Surface freezing line also being overrun by some warmer air, so we'll keep an eye on that, as that is a decent setup if you have enough moisture for freezing rain potential there. So we'll keep an eye on that. And again, your PIREPs and your pilot reports are very critical for icing conditions there in this kind of circumstance. So keep your eyes on that in the morning out in the northern parts of the Yukon Delta and around Norton Sound, but no major indication of that right now. Icing potential, you can see moisture is playing a role in the forecast, above 4,000 to about 5,000 feet across the Gulf of Alaska toward the western Alaska range and north into the upper Yukon Valley and the upper Tanana Valley above 3,000 feet. Generally light to maybe some occasional moderate there. As you get out across the Bering Strait and south of the Gulf of Vanadier below 9,000 feet, and also across the southern Bering Sea above 2,000 feet for the central Aleutians, and then generally south of Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, you could find some light icing potential there. Here's a look at the jet stream. The fast-moving river of air is generally steering most of the really big active weather well south of Alaska here. Wind speeds around 150 to 160 knots tops. But all of that is because of this low pressure system here. The general circulation is keeping a lot of the moisture moving into the Gulf, but it doesn't really have that big punch that a major storm system would. So we're getting the moisture, we're just not getting the oomph at this point. High pressure across the Chukchi Sea, guiding stronger winds around Norton Sound and south of Nome, and also pushing air around out into the northern parts of Canada around 80 knots or so. At 9,000 feet, you can see that broader circulation here across the southern Bering. Winds are pretty light, really, across the Bering, anywhere from 5 to 15 knots. A little bit stronger on the western side as usual, 10 to 20 knots there, 30 knots on the south side. Our next weather maker for southeast is showing up here as well. Wind speeds coming in from the west at 20 to 35 knots and moving over southeast lightly at 5 to 10 knots. Wind speeds across the interior are also light at this time. Here's our onshore flow bringing in moisture to the Arctic coast and the Brooks Range. At about 15 knots, coming in mostly from the north. At 3,000 feet, it's got a little bit more of a northeasterly component, 20 knots there. Also over the Brooks Range, 20 knots, slowing down once it passes the Bering Strait. Low pressure stacked and packed across the southern Bering, but again, not a whole lot of wind with that. Across Bristol Bay, 5 to 15 knots, 25 knots across the chain. Northerlies from Kiska to Attu at 15 knots, and southerlies across the Gulf coming into southern parts of southeast at about 25 to 40 knots. Light winds across Prince William Sound. What about turbulence? Well, only a few spots will have any significant turbulence across it, and that'll be the Chukchi Coast below 3,000 feet, across the eastern Brooks Range, and also around the Arctic Village. For coastal areas of southern, southeast, and the southern inner channels below 4,000 feet, and also across the central chain. Watch for some light to occasionally isolated moderate there across the central and western Aleutians. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back with the ice edge and a look at your marine weather in just a few minutes.
This special video is a part of AOPA's Project Pilot, a new program for people considering taking the first step in the adventure of a lifetime, learning to fly. Hello, I'm Phil Boyer, president of the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association. We're known to most people as AOPA for short. And it isn't hard to spot our members at the local airport. Just look for the cars and airplanes displaying the AOPA wings. Through AOPA's Project Pilot, we've invited our more than 320,000 members to think of people they know, people like you, who would enjoy the benefits of becoming a pilot. You've been nominated by an AOPA member to receive the special AOPA Project Pilot student kit that this video is a part of. That member has also volunteered to act as your personal mentor if you decide, as we hope you will, to become one of the nearly 700,000 Americans holding a pilot's license. In the next half hour or so, we'll share with you the answers to many questions people ask about flight training. We'll ask noted airline captain and aviation journalist Barry Schiff to explain the basics of getting a pilot's license. And finally, we'll take you along on a student pilot's first flying lesson. More detailed information is also included in your student kit. You'll see that winning your wings is far from impossible. Some 70,000 people, from high school kids to grandmothers, do it every year. From airline captains in the cockpits of jetliners to students in single-engine, two-place trainers, pilots get something extra out of life because they've discovered one of life's most exciting challenges. And if you're like most people who fly, you enjoy a challenge. These women and men have also discovered how to squeeze more time and more fun out of personal and business travel, or just a weekend out and about. Flying is an activity enjoyed by the entire family, whether on a day trip to the beach or that long-awaited vacation at Disney World. Fun has been the key word for my wife and me as we've enjoyed the many different places easily accessible to light planes. As you can see in these home videos, an airplane has provided many enjoyable days, weekends, or even full vacations visiting exciting new places and making new friends. Almost everyone has a place they can get away from it all, be it mountain cabin, lake resort, or family homestead. For us, it's been wherever we can fly, which is just about anywhere. Forget crowded airline terminals. Just a few hours of flying can bring you relaxation and enjoyment that is a world apart from the everyday, such as the Bahamas, made even more enjoyable with good friends. Scenic Calgary, Canada. Or a fun fly-in breakfast complete with personally guided tours of their craft by proud owners. After 20 years of exploring the United States by air, we even visited Europe with our own plane. Learning to fly is easier than you think. It's surprisingly affordable, and it's safe. In fact, The safety record of light airplanes has never been better. Now, I could go on telling you just how great flying is, but instead, you should hear it from people just like you. Just like you, except at some point, they took that first step and made a phone call or visited the airport and got started on the adventure of a lifetime. Adventure and excitement certainly describe this man, the head coach of the NFL's Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Sam Wyche. You couldn't find a busier person who still finds the time to fly.
The opportunity to fly would also be functional for me because I do a lot of banquet speaking. I go places and need to be somewhere at 5:30 in the afternoon and would still like to get back that evening and not kill all day long in an airport or in a car driving somewhere. Plus just the fun of it. It's relaxing for me.
Relaxation isn't a word you would normally associate with being a pilot. But for Sam and a lot of us, that's just what it is.
As a football coach, I'm constantly worried about what players to play, whether to go for it on fourth down, what strategy to employ, and I can get up in that plane on a Friday afternoon or a Saturday afternoon before a Sunday game and lose myself. And for an hour, finding holes in the clouds, I can forget about football because your attention has to be totally on that airplane when you're in the airplane. It is a serious business, but it's a very relaxing one.
Sam has to be pretty smart to be an NFL head coach, but you don't have to be a genius to learn to fly.
The skill is learnable by just about everybody. And the mental part of it, just like anything else, if you put the time in and do the studying that you have to do, which is more fun than study, you can learn it.
Even though Sam now owns an airplane, he started out by renting. As a matter of fact, about 2/3 of the pilot population rent when they want to fly. And renting definitely has advantages.
The nice thing about renting an airplane is you go out and you get in the airplane, you fly somewhere, and maybe you're in the air for an hour, and once you get there, you have lunch or you visit friends and you're there for 3 or 4 hours and get back in the plane and fly back. You may have had the plane all day, but you're only paying for the time that you're actually flying the airplane. So a 2-hour cost may benefit you a full day's enjoyment somewhere else.
Here's a look at the sea ice edge. You can see with warmer weather moving across the southern Bering Sea, conditions have rapidly changed across areas south of Macquarie and Nunivak Island toward the Pribilofs and into Bristol Bay, where we're only keeping some marginal ice across some of the capes and into the Kuskokwim Delta region. Also rapidly changing conditions across Norton Sound south of the Bering Strait to St. Lawrence Island, and plenty of open water west of Gamble. Here's a look at the weather for southeast now. Southeasterly winds will continue across Clarence Strait at 25 knots with a 7-foot sea. We'll keep light northerlies coming down through the northern inner channels in Lynn Canal. 15 knots with a 3-foot sea there, and changing conditions north of Sitka with northerlies up toward Cross Sound and Yakutat. At south of Sitka, 35 knots from the southeast with a 12-foot sea. For Thursday, winds will come in from the south and west as a frontal boundary will be located right about here and stretching into the southern inner channels. Look for southeasterlies working their way northward through Stevens Passage. We'll combat that a little bit with a light northerly flow in the Lynn Canal, 10 knots with a 2-foot sea, and winds still out of the north up around Yakutat and Icy Cape, but we'll get an offshore breeze out of Cross Sound and point southward towards Sitka, 25 knots with a 10-foot sea on Thursday. For south central, very light winds, if not variable winds, will be found across most areas, and small seas inside Prince William Sound through Cook Inlet, Shelikof Strait, and west of the Barrens, with 15 knots there in Shelikof Strait from the south and west, and a little bit more of an offshore flow from Kodiak Island up to 20 knots with a 6-foot sea. For Thursday, very little change, a little bit more of a south and westerly flow changing in, but as far as wind speeds go, everything stays fairly light. 10 knots inside of Prince William Sound with small seas, 5 to 6-foot seas across the north and western Gulf, and south and westerly flow up into Cook Inlet from Shelikof Strait, 3 to 4-foot seas there on 10 to 15 knot winds. For Bristol Bay, 1-foot seas there in ice-free waters. Most of them are at this point. 10-knot winds from the south. Variable conditions as you head down toward the Bering Sea coast with 10 knots there with a 2-foot sea. Southwesterlies in the Pacific coast, 15 knots with a 6 to 7-foot sea on Wednesday. And very little change again on Thursday. Southerlies remain light inside of Bristol Bay and down the coast up to 15 knots. And 15 knots for all areas on the Pacific coast here with 6 to 7-foot seas and a south and westerly flow for your Thursday. As we get into the Aleutians, a little bit more of a northwesterly flow west of Adak out towards Shemya, 20 knots with a 6 to 8-foot sea. Westerlies across Adak and Atka themselves, 20 knots with a 5 to 6-foot sea there. Light and variable winds between Nikolsky and Atka, and look for south and westerly winds on the Pacific coast with 7-foot seas and light winds around Unalaska and in the bay itself. Look for very small seas and winds up to 10 knots or so inside of Wednesday. Across Thursday, very little change in that area, but for the central chain, a west and northwesterly flow will start to pick up a little bit more, 15 to 25 knots, seas ranging from 4 to 7 feet, and a west and southwesterly flow for the western chain, 20 to 30 knots with a 6-foot sea there on Thursday. Winds south of Nikolsky and Unalaska hovering from about 20 knots or so with a 7-foot sea with winds from the south and west. For the west coast, stronger winds north of Nunivak Island, but you have to go all the way to St. Lawrence Island and St. Matthew to really get into them. 20 to 25 knots with a 5 to 6-foot sea. Light and variable winds north of Nunivak Island and small seas there. Watch for freezing spray in this area, though. This will be one area where we'll have a higher threat, especially just south of the ice edge. Light southeasterlies in the Kuskokwim Delta region and around St. Paul and St. George, 10 knots and variable with a 2-foot sea. For Thursday, little change there, little change across the southwest coast. The strongest winds remain in the north and the west, 15 to 20 knots around St. Matthew, northerlies with a 3-foot sea. Around St. Lawrence Island, northeasterlies, and that'll continue into Norton Sound. Look for 4-foot seas in that region. For the north slope, look for a north and easterly flow for the Beaufort Seacoast. Over the ice, winds remain fairly light. That makes sense under high pressure. That's also going to push the slop inland a little bit, so freezing fog and flurries will still be an issue. East and northeasterlies down the Chukchi coast, 20 to 30 knots there as we continue into Wednesday. For Thursday, winds diminish across the west. Winds pick up a little bit more for the Beaufort Seacoast, 10 to 15 knots coming out of the east. So the weather will be changing as we get toward the end of the week, slowly and surely. Let's recap your weather conditions with the latest map for tonight. Low pressure across southeast at 990 millibars will start working rainfall in from south to north as we head through the remainder of tonight and into tomorrow morning. A frontal boundary will accompany that, so winds will be switching around across the central and northern parts of the Panhandle as we go on into your Thursday or into your Wednesday and eventually Thursday too. For South Central, showers mainly confined to Prince William Sound and parts of Southwest, as well as the central and eastern chain. Snow showers are possible around the Yukon Valley and out across St. Lawrence Island and the Seward Peninsula. And watch for areas of fog, freezing fog and flurries across the North Slope as we get into your Wednesday. Conditions will gradually change as we look at Thursday and Friday. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.